Have you ever tried to engage with a massive bureaucracy?
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe some incredibly opaque government process, and you just walk away feeling like the whole system was actively working against you?
Like they're putting up invisible walls just to keep you out?
Exactly. If you are nodding your head right now, you are going to find today's deep dive absolutely fascinating.
It really is a dynamic that affects every single one of us.
Right. Our mission today is to unpack the mechanics of transparency, banking oversight, and, well, the true power of the citizen's voice. Or maybe just the illusion of it.
Because the way these bureaucratic systems are structured behind the scenes, it ultimately dictates the policies that govern our everyday lives.
Yeah, from the tech you use to pay for groceries all the way to whether or not you can actually afford a home.
To explore this, we are looking at a truly remarkable original source today. We've got our hands on a chain of letters and emails drafted by an advocacy group.
They call themselves the BankWarriors.
Right, the BankWarriors.
Yeah.
And the central figure in these documents is a citizen named Caulfield.
He is corresponding directly with members of Parliament. Specifically, he's targeting the committee chair, Ed Husic MP.
And through these letters, we get a front row seat to an everyday citizen basically colliding head-on with the massive machinery of government.
But before we jump into the details, we really do need to set some important ground rules for our discussion today.
Yes, very important. The source material we are examining contains highly politically charged viewpoints.
Very charged.
The authors reference major political parties, minor parties like One Nation, and they call out specific politicians and corporate executives by name.
So we want to explicitly state to you, the listener, that we are completely impartial here. We are taking no sides.
Not at all.
And we are absolutely not endorsing any of the viewpoints or political opinions expressed in these documents.
Our job is simply to explore the fascinating arguments and the raw perspectives laid out in this original source material.
We're just looking at the mechanics of the arguments themselves.
We are analyzing the friction between citizen advocacy and institutional processes, exactly as it was written in the correspondence. Nothing more, nothing less.
Okay, let's unpack this. The catalyst for this entire email chain is an upcoming public hearing.
Specifically is the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Economics.
Right, and they are set to hold public hearings on Tuesday the 24th and Wednesday the 25th of February 2026.
And the agenda is massive.
Huge. They are looking into digital payment schemes, digital wallets, blockchain.
Essentially the entire future of the tech and payment sector.
Yeah. And look at the guest list for this hearing. The media release states they will be hearing from major banks, global card network providers, Apple, and Australian Payments Plus.
We are talking about the absolute titans of the global financial and technological sectors.
When a committee like this convenes, they are basically writing the rules of the game for the next decade of finance.
Which brings us to Caulfield.
Right. Caulfield, who notes in his letters that he has been attending these parliamentary inquiries intermittently for 12 years, gets a notification about this major public hearing.
But there's a massive catch.
He receives exactly 24 hours notice before the hearing commences.
24 hours.
One day. He immediately writes to Committee Chair Ed Husic MP, asking if he agrees this is entirely unreasonable.
And he outright demands a 14-day minimum standard for public notices.
What's fascinating here is the stark disparity in preparation. You have massive multinational corporations like Apple and the major banks
who are undoubtedly prepped by armies of lawyers.
Right. Lawyers and PR teams well in advance. They know what's coming.
And on the flip side, the everyday constituent, the very people these systems are supposed to serve, are effectively shut out by a 24-hour ticking clock.
The administrative process itself becomes a barrier to entry. Time is essentially being used as a weapon of exclusion.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I really cared about this hearing and I lived in Sydney or Melbourne, couldn't I just hop on a quick morning flight to Canberra and make it work? Even with just a day's notice?
Maybe, if you have a highly flexible job and disposable income. But what if you don't live in a major city hub?
True.
That brings us to another advocate mentioned in these documents, Paul Herman. Herman points out that a 24-hour notice period completely disenfranchises regional Australians.
With only a day's warning, the only people who could possibly attend in person are locals living right there in Canberra, or highly paid lobbyists who are already stationed there.
So it's a geographical lockout on top of a logistical one.
Exactly. Herman goes so far as to suggest this tactic appears to be a deliberate policy decision to erode citizen rights.
He actually issues a warning in the emails stating that if a 14-day notice period isn't implemented, they will have no other recourse than to take the issue directly to the media.
It's a very bold line in the sand. So how does the politician respond to that kind of threat?
Well, Ed Husic MP does reply to Caulfield, and he leans on a pretty standard logistical defense.
Husic notes that when they are scheduling these massive public hearings, it can be a real administrative nightmare locking down the schedules of high-profile witnesses.
The classic blame the calendar defense.
Right. He claims that bottleneck is what delays getting the official program published. Husic is basically saying, hey, wrangling CEOs is tough work. We publish it as soon as we can.
And to be fair to Husic, he does point out that when the committee is officially inviting public submissions, he actively tries to give long notice.
Yeah, he cites a recent credit card inquiry that was announced in the first week of December, with submissions closing at the end of January.
Deliberately giving people the holiday period to prepare.
But Caulfield completely rejects that defense. He argues that waiting on bank executives to confirm their schedules actually creates a perverse incentive.
Caulfield specifically names Shane Elliott, the CEO of ANZ, in his rebuttal.
Right. He argues that it is actually in the bankers' best interest to drag their feet and respond late to the committee's scheduling requests.
Let me make sure I'm following that logic. The bankers delay confirming their attendance,
Which forces the committee to delay publishing the schedule.
which means the public only gets 24 hours notice.
Which means the public can't show up to ask hard questions. That is the exact loophole Caulfield is highlighting.
Wow. If the corporations control the timeline, they indirectly control public access.
And he connects this to a much broader issue regarding these specific hearings.
He points out that many of these House of Economics Committee hearings, specifically the ones involving the big four banks and the major government watchdogs, often don't even invite or allow public submissions in the first place.
When you say the major watchdogs, we should probably clarify who we're talking about for the listener.
Good point. Caulfield is specifically calling out hearings involving ASIC, which is the Australian Securities and Investments Commission.
Think of them as the corporate cop that polices market behavior.
And APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, which regulates the structural safety and stability of the financial institutions themselves.
Caulfield is saying that when these massive regulatory bodies and the big banks get together in a room with politicians, the public isn't allowed to submit their grievances ahead of time.
Which leads to what Caulfield calls a sanitized view of the banking sector.
Exactly. If the Oversight Committee is only hearing from the regulators and the banks themselves, the resulting oversight is inherently filtered. It's a closed-loop conversation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Caulfield then starts listing other examples of this closed-loop system, showing that this isn't just a one-off issue with a parliamentary schedule.
He brings up the Financial Review, or AFR, Banking Summit.
Caulfield says he requested that a consumer panel be included in this high-profile summit so real people could share their experiences.
His requests were completely ignored.
He describes the summit as an industry-funded echo chamber, where the industry exclusively funds it, attends it, and pontificates on it without ever facing their customers.
That brings us to my absolute favorite part of the letters, which is the anecdote about bank annual general meetings, or AGMs.
Think about the concept of an AGM for a second. In theory, it's the one time a year when any shareholder, even someone who owns just a few shares, gets to stand at a microphone and hold the board of directors accountable.
In theory, yes. But Caulfield argues that AGMs no longer provide that forum.
He claims the act of publicly meeting small shareholders has become entirely tokenistic.
To prove this, he points to a specific instance where ANZ allegedly threatened to use security to evict a shareholder after that person had been speaking for exactly 10 seconds.
In seconds.
Exactly 10 seconds.
Imagine that. You wait all year, you step up to the microphone, and you get 10 seconds before security is called. For you listening, think about your own bank.
Yeah, if you had 10 seconds at a microphone to change their policy or air a grievance, what could you actually accomplish?
You couldn't even finish introducing yourself.
It perfectly illustrates the structural barriers that keep corporate decisions behind closed doors.
Caulfield's overarching point is that the real decisions aren't made at the AGM microphone.
No, they're negotiated privately, behind the scenes, with major institutional shareholders long before the public meeting even begins.
The public forum is just theater.
Now, at this point, you might be wondering why all this bureaucratic maneuvering and scheduling red tape actually matters to you.
Why should we care if a parliamentary committee has a sanitized view of the banking sector?
Well, Caulfield pivots his argument right into something that affects almost everyone's wallet: the housing market, and inflation.
He specifically asks Husic why housing affordability in Australia is near the worst in the world.
This is a crucial pivot in the letters. Caulfield is connecting the lack of public oversight directly to unchecked systemic issues.
He acknowledges that housing supply is definitely a problem, and he actually praises politician Claire O'Neill as a capable person to handle that side of the equation.
But he insists there is a massive ignored issue on the demand side. He calls them liar loans.
Let's break down what a liar loan actually is.
These are mortgages or loans granted under false pretenses.
Usually this means the applicant's income was overstated or their living expenses were vastly understated.
Often with the mortgage broker or the bank looking the other way because they want to close the deal.
Caulfield argues that these liar loans artificially pump up a buyer's borrowing capacity, which adds massive unnatural demand to the property market.
People are bidding with money they shouldn't technically have access to.
And that excess borrowing power bids up the price of every home on the market, driving the outsized inflation in Australian house prices.
Caulfield brings heavy data to back this up. He cites surveys conducted by the global investment bank UBS over several years.
These surveys consistently show an across-the-board average of 20% of Australian mortgages being liar loans.
Let that number sink in for a second.
20%.
Yeah.
1 in 5 loans in the entire market is based on an inaccurate application file, according to the data he's citing.
And he specifically points out that the surveys ranked ANZ as the worst of all the banks for these inaccurate loans.
Caulfield is furious that the regulators seemingly missed this massive economic driver.
He argues that APRA, that structural banking regulator we mentioned earlier, and the highly publicized Hayne Royal Commission completely turned a blind eye to the systemic impact of these liar loans.
The Hayne Royal Commission was supposed to be the ultimate reckoning for the Australian financial services industry. It was a massive public inquiry into banking misconduct.
But Caulfield alleges that the Commission's terms of reference—
the actual rules defining what they were allowed to investigate.
Exactly. He alleges those terms were influenced by the CEOs and chairs of the 4 major banks.
He's saying the banks helped draw the boundaries of their own investigation, which constrained what the Commission could actually look into.
Caulfield is demanding action. He wants a new inquiry specifically focused on liar loans.
His stated goal is to reduce housing demand by 20%, which he believes would have a serious, immediate cooling effect on house price inflation.
But beneath the economic argument is a deeper, more volatile argument about political trust.
He writes that trust in bankers and politicians remains incredibly low because citizens feel partitioned, set aside, and ignored.
And here's where we touch on the political landscape. Again, keeping our strict neutrality in mind, we're just reporting his stated perspective here.
Caulfield claims this feeling of being ignored by the major parties is precisely why those parties are slowly losing ground, while minor parties, like One Nation, are perceived to be listening.
He explicitly notes that it doesn't even matter if those minor parties have the legislative ability to implement solutions.
Right. It's the sheer perception that they are actually listening to the common person that draws voters in.
It is a stark warning to the political establishment about the real-world costs of shutting the public out of the conversation.
This raises an important question. What is the actual tangible cost of these systemic failures?
Caulfield dives into the difference between simply piling on more regulation versus implementing effective regulation.
Because from his perspective, the current system of oversight isn't just inefficient, it's just a series of broken promises.
The correspondence details several of these alleged failures. Caulfield mentions Daniel Molino, who previously chaired the House Economics Committee.
According to Caulfield, Molino promised to write to ANZ regarding what Caulfield calls an abomination of failures that ultimately resulted in ANZ repossessing his brother's property.
But after 7 follow-up attempts by Caulfield, the letter never eventuated.
Caulfield states bluntly that the politician simply broke his word.
And it wasn't just individual politicians letting people down. He says that the Hayne Royal Commission failed on a systemic level as well.
He points out that as a farmer, he watched closely as a highly recommended national farm debt mediation scheme simply never materialized.
The commission suggested it, and then it vanished into the bureaucratic ether. It wasn't even canvassed in the most rudimentary manner.
Which brings us to how the banks themselves are penalized when they do break the rules.
Caulfield points to an all-time Australian record fine issued by ASIC against ANZ.
The initial fine was for $240 million, which the courts later upped to $250 million.
On paper, to the average citizen, $250 million sounds like a massive victory for regulation.
But Caulfield does the math, and this is where the illusion of regulation really shatters. We need to look at the scale of a major bank.
Caulfield points out that a $250 million fine represents less than a fortnight's profit for ANZ.
2 weeks of profit. If you make billions a year, a $250 million fine isn't a deterrent.
It's essentially a parking ticket. Exactly. He argues that bankers have learned that these fines are simply a cost of doing business.
It's factored right into their operating budget.
It doesn't deter them, and he says they continue to act with total impunity.
And what happens when a consumer tries to fight back through the official channels?
Caulfield brings up AFCA, the Australian Financial Complaints Authority.
This is supposed to be the independent ombudsman, the referee you go to when you have a dispute with your bank.
But Caulfield states that AFCA is fundamentally untrusted by the victims.
Why? Because it is largely funded by the financial industry itself. The victims see the referee as being paid by the opposing team.
Because the massive fines don't change corporate behavior, and because the official dispute resolution bodies are viewed with deep suspicion, the human toll of this bureaucratic stonewalling continues to mount.
This is the crux of Caulfield's entire argument.
This isn't just about scheduling notices or numbers on a spreadsheet or even housing inflation.
It's about lives being destroyed by a system that refuses to listen.
Wow. Okay, this is where the source material takes a very dark, very solemn turn.
Caulfield shares a deeply personal, tragic revelation with the MP.
He states that within this framework of ongoing failures, after years of attempting to just be listened to and fighting relentlessly for a fair banking outcome for his family,
He attempted to take his own life, twice.
he then makes a chilling comparison in the letter.
Caulfield brings up the terrible Bondi massacre, a highly publicized tragedy that took 15 lives.
He contrasts the immediate national outrage and action surrounding that highly visible tragedy with the invisible, silent toll of bank malfeasance.
He asserts that multiple banking failures and institutional neglect have taken hundreds, if not thousands, of lives in the shadows with zero national outcry.
It is his way of forcing the political establishment to look directly at the human carnage caused by financial ruin.
He is demanding that they weigh the cost of their administrative delays and their sanitized hearings against the literal lives of their constituents.
When a citizen is pushed to the brink of suicide because they cannot get a massive institution to acknowledge a basic grievance, the system isn't just inefficient.
It's lethal.
So what does this all mean?
Where does this intense, highly emotional email chain finally land?
Well, it ends with a final, unwavering ultimatum from the citizen to the state.
Husic, the MP, had replied to Caulfield saying he received the message and would endeavor to provide longer notice for future hearings.
But for Caulfield, after everything he and his brother have been through, after the repossessions and the systemic failures, endeavoring to do better is no longer acceptable.
He writes back and explicitly rejects the MP's offer. He tells Husic that endeavoring to provide longer notice is unacceptable.
He states that a reasonable 14-day period of notice is fair, it is non-negotiable, and it is the absolute bare minimum required to even begin restoring an ounce of trust.
It's a total rejection of standard political placation. He draws a hard line in the sand and says, no more excuses about scheduling.
When you synthesize all of this, the 24-hour notices, the 10-second AGM limits, the unchecked liar loans, and the tragic personal toll,
what these sources reveal is a massive, seemingly insurmountable chasm between institutional power and the average citizen.
it forces you to think about how structural red tape, something as seemingly mundane as a 24-hour hearing notice, fundamentally shapes the policies that govern your own wallet, your housing market, and your life.
The mechanics of bureaucracy are not neutral. They are a filter designed to determine who gets to participate in democracy and who gets shut out.
It's the invisible wall we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
It's about who gets a comfortable seat at the table when the rules of the economic game are being written, and who is left outside banging on the door.
And it leaves us with a final thought to mull over, something that really builds on the deep frustration woven through Caulfield's letters.
If a democratic system is explicitly designed to seek public input, but the administrative hurdles make that input practically impossible to provide.
Is it a broken system, or is it functioning exactly as intended?